Okay, good evening to all of you out there in YouTube land. Hey, Scribe Neoseth, you are already, I see there in the chat. Thank you very much for coming in. For all of you out there, just so that you know, I'm not sure if how much you study my background, but you may have noticed that this is a completely different background here. In the last week and a half or maybe 2 weeks since my last episode, I have completely moved. I was on one side of the Charles River here in Boston. Then I moved to the other side of the Charles River. That was like a year or so ago. Now I've moved back to the other side of the Charles. So all you need to know is that I'm on the Charles somewhere. This is what I'm trying to make into like my new little studio space. It's not a studio, but I mean this part of my apartment is going to be my studio space. You can tell by this amazingly blank wall. Look at that. Freshly repainted. They sanded the floors for me. They redid like everything. I'm super excited to be here. I don't know if my neighbor is because I'm in an apartment with a lot of wood surfaces. And basically, like, I'm streaming now from here, so I don't know if everything's echoing through the place, but we'll find out later. We'll see. But at any rate, thank you very much for tuning in. As I was saying, I do appreciate your viewership. My name is Matt Yancik. I am the host and the founder here at Manufactured Myth and Legerdemain. And tonight I'm bringing you another episode of Role Player with 1,000 Faces. So every couple weeks or so on the program, I like to bring you somebody that's doing something super interesting, super cool, super fun, super worthwhile, super awesome to talk about in the role-playing community. But wait, I'm not just gonna throw my guest out there. I got to tease a few things first. And that is that this Friday coming up, I'm actually going to be running my 4th episode of Sword in the Darkness using the Cypher system. We've got a really cool little story going. I do hope that you will stop on by and visit us. The actual play is actually gaining a little bit of momentum, and we had something like 15 or 20 viewers the last time we were on, which I know those aren't Matt Click numbers. Those aren't Critical Role numbers. But for me, I'm very happy when people, just even a few people, are watching and commenting as well. Also, if you are interested in finding out all of the cool things that we're doing, I do have a few other platforms. So I am on the Twitter and on the Facebook. Though I must admit I'm not too often on the Facebook, though I try to be, and I will announce schedules and things like that from time to time. So if you'd like to check us out, if you'd like to follow along and see what we're doing, please do stop in to visit us on Twitter and Facebook. Last but not least, I really do appreciate our growth. It's been great. We're getting lots of new viewers, and again, it's a very relative term, but for me, I'm very happy approaching 500. For me, that's larger than any classroom I've ever taught in my life. So I'm very happy with that, and I thank all of you that have subscribed. But, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just going on and on. But you didn't come here for me. You didn't come here to be like have advertising thrown at you. Wait a minute. Actually, if you're on the internet, you probably did come to have advertising thrown at you. But at any rate, tonight I have got the author of the 7 Ages series, the 7th Age series with me tonight, which he has billed as a post-apocalyptic, sarcastic urban fantasy. Rick Heinz is a freelance writer, and his work has been featured in some awesome stuff, not limited to Dungeons & Dragons, The Crow, the role-playing game, which I want to talk to a little bit about the soundtrack for The Crow. I know that sounds like an odd thing here, but I think I kind of want to know some stuff about it. So Rick has worked on, basically, you probably know him from Sirens, Battle of the Bards, The Red Opera, Last Days of the Warlock, and now, most recently, his like super successful, I think they're like 200% funded, and they've still got like a week or so to go. The Black Ballad, which is I'm not even going to bother to try to describe it. I would rather have him describe it, but it's like a super cool idea. I cannot wait to hear more about it. And now, you know what? You're probably all telling yourselves, I can't wait until Matt just shuts up and brings the guest on. So you know what? Let's just do that. Let's meet Rick Heinz. Rick, thank you very much for enduring all of that. I apologize. But I do certainly appreciate you coming on the big program. How's it going over there?
Well, it's Chicago. The world hasn't ended. Australia, last I checked, is still alive. And fear
Most of
not,
it.
I was not enduring through anything.
Oh,
I was kind of noticing how you may have moved into your new space, your studio set up, but you've obviously coveted the most important treasures first with your shelf of game books and your PopCap figurines already all set up.
yes, and I don't know if you can see it. You can't quite see it. I've got a 12-inch Ultraman up there to match my Ultraman poster. Like that's like a really like from the new Netflix series. But yes,
Oh, I am a Ultraman, Godzilla, Kaiju, fan. All of these things. I mean, there's thanks to weird interactions you have in life. I've managed to become friends with actually Hitaro, who does the illustrations for Ultraman, and because I keep running into him at conventions, and we started talking and
oh
hanging
no
out
way.
more. So yeah, I I clock these things.
That's awesome. And you know what? It's so funny that you do mention that. Like that was the first thing actually that went up. And the reason wasn't necessarily the one that you'd think of. It wasn't because I needed access to them. It's because they took up the most space. And I had disassembled the shelving unit there, and I had all the boxes all over the place, and I had all my Funko Pops, and I have action figures and all this other stuff, and I just needed to put it someplace. And I'm like, if I can get it into the studio, then I can free up like living space. So that is kind of nice to have. But anyway, folks, I'm so sorry. We're here. I am going on and on about my stuff and we want to know about Rick's stuff. So I want to tell you, first of all, congratulations on the Black Ballad. I think this is super awesome. I'm super jealous because I just think this is an awesome idea, and it makes me want to like steal it. But of course, you've already thought of it, so now that's not possible, and it's your intellectual property now.
Anybody can steal any idea. Execution is 100% of it. There are a bajillion ideas that are all in the same thing, and a writer can execute that same 1,000 ideas. Every writer will execute them all differently, and it's a different product at the end.
Yes, I would actually agree with you on that. It's all about the execution, and from what I've seen and what I like the sneak peeks and all of that stuff that I found on BackerKit, I think it's like super cool. Can you tell us a little bit about the Black Ballad? What is the Black
Oh,
Ballad? It's very
I'm
exciting.
the most targeted person that would probably ramble the most about it because I am so excited. The Black Ballad, at its end and its core, is an epic, sprawling setting and campaign that's about a year and a half of gameplay that answers the question for your parties of what you died, now what? The players all, TPKs and death happens in fantasy worlds all of the time. But what is often not thought about is the impact of resurrection and necromancy in fantasy settings. For a mere 100 gold piece diamond, a king can be brought back from the grave. And that begs the question, what consequences does anybody actually have? And so we're going to propose this very divine campaign, this epic story that meaningfully puts a very serious question into the hands of players on whether or not resurrection magic should even be allowed to exist.
So let me ask this. The Black Ballad begins where your adventures
And
end or your lives end. Now, something that kind of interested me a little bit when I was sort of looking at your background and looking at what you've created and sort of your particular niche or your little area of role playing is that you are creating campaigns that seem to all be in around 10 parts or so. Is there some grander, like what is the grand story of the Black Ballad? What are the players who have perished going to be exploring through their adventure?
So we have this entity called Majin the Betrayer. And when players die in their campaign world, they fall, they go down to the Sunless Crossing. They actually come to terms with that. They're with their dead. They understand, like they have to learn. Oh, here's what happened to us, and come to terms with what might have really happened. We get some great conspiratorial twists for storytellers and hooks for players to actually get involved with their characters or what went wrong to get them there. Or on the flip side, if you didn't start the adventure dead, you just happen to want to pick up old retired characters and assemble them together after they've like passed on in their lives. But the grand story is the idea that two factions that have continued to hate each other in the material world for time immemorial, paladins versus warlocks, as it were, have finally managed to get a bloody holy war to such a crescendo that thousands and thousands upon of souls are start descending and crashing down all at once.
Mm.
But now they're infected with something. There's a curse or a plague that we call it the Scarlet Malice that will cause a calamity that I don't want to get too much into if sort of left unchecked. But the players always have choice. They can choose to side with them. They can choose to side with the Desenins of Nox Valar in the city of the dead, or they could try to escape the Sunless Crossing entirely and maybe get to an actual proper afterlife.
Mm.
Because the Sunless Crossing is this purgatory realm that is a transitionary state between a god's final resting place and the material world. Because if you're a deity or a devil, you probably don't like souls getting resurrected right out of your afterlife all
Mm.
of the time. So a long time ago, we're kind of proposing the idea that like, yeah, all the gods got together and said, we're going to create like a buffering zone, and it's going to be here so that when all the magic fiddly bits are done, we actually finally get our soul. Now, we really want to play with these themes of epicness and metal and like crazy adventures where it's not, you're not off in the woods, killing four goblins or
Mm.
anything. We like dynamic encounters or meaningful encounters that give very strong role play. And then you did call it right. I tend to write campaigns
Mm.
in 10 full chapters. And the reason for that is twofold. One of them is it ties very well to operatic soundtracks. A metal album or a score or a musical album usually tend to have around 10 tracks.
Mm.
And there's a story that can be told over a lyrical set of songs. And also 10 adventure beats, 10 major plotline
Mm.
beats give you room to run a lot of side quests. And then inside one chapter, you could have 3 or 4 separate acts and things like that with little branching quests. But 10 iconic tent posts will allow you to complete a full hero's journey
Mm.
with your character all the way through by the end. So there's kind of some like literary uh,
Mm.
styling to
Mm-hmm.
why
Mm-hmm.
I gravitated towards most of my main campaign books. And reality, you say, oh, it's 10 chapters, and somebody might think, oh, well, that might only be like 10 game sessions.
Right.
Far from it. Those 10 chapters can last you easily a year or a year and a half of campaigning. More if your players decide to go wander off into the wilds and you
Right.
end up on complete side quests down there. But then as a storyteller, when you're ready to issue the next major plot beat, now you have your beat ready to go.
Mm. So it's always kind of like cooking in the background, but there's a lot of room to sort of explore and move around within that kind of world and within the
Yep.
story and create your own.
It's incredibly important to me that I write campaigns that are able to plug into anybody's game system. You actually mentioned the Cypher system earlier. That might be one of our compatibility packs if we unlock our last stretch goal, because storylines can be run for any game system.
Mm.
It's easy to convert the stats and the mechanics as long as there's fantasy, myth, magic, and most importantly for us, resurrection.
Mm. Mm.
You can run the Black Ballad.
So I was So, ladies and gentlemen, when I invite a guest on, I do a lot of due diligence and I research their background. And then once they accept their offer, I go in and I stalk them and I sort of find out all as much information about them as I can. And one of the things I kind of noticed, sort of looking back at your background and the things that you've worked on and your creations and the stories you create, like you mentioned, of course, like the 10 tracks, and actually you use a musical metaphor there, and of course as far as I know, at least two of your projects you've worked with, and I apologize if I'm getting their name incorrect.
Dia Morte.
Okay,
Yes.
great. All right, I was going to say it right. Oh, you should just give my mama one. But anyway, so I sort of noticed that you, in my opinion, sort of embody storytelling. You are a storyteller in a way that I've talked to other people who I feel like, okay, this is a role-playing game creator, or this is a, this is a designer. I feel like, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like you come at games from a storytelling perspective. Would you sort of, like say that's a fair assessment?
Oh,
Or
100%. No, here you are. It's spot on accurate. I am the white paper person with all the crazy ideas, that, you give me a blank piece of paper and I will start building up worlds and storylines and concepts of how would I actually play this, run it. And that comes from two things. I had been a actual storyteller for like game things, whether it be I've run every system under the sun: Rifts, Legend of the Five Rings, Vampire the Masquerade. But my first introduction into gaming ever was Wraith the Oblivion with
Oh,
two
wow.
players by candlelight,
That's
outside of a
awesome.
chess after chess club in high school. And so we would sit there on a regular basis, and we would tell these really haunting tales with three people with only one character, because in Wraith the Oblivion you play yourself and then somebody else could play your shadow, trying to go the other way with the character. And it's an incredibly role play, high intense personal tale of tragedy as a game system. And sure, later on we can get into cool like hell divers and going to kill specters and stuff, but at its core, Wraith is a story of redemption. And that was my first introduction into role playing and storytelling. It was well before I had read Dungeons and Dragons. I'd played online muds and things like that, but actually playing it, no, it was Wraith, and that left an imprint on me because I would go to systems like Changeling the Dreaming, or then I eventually tried to run Dungeons and Dragons, and that was my first like long-term campaign. But I didn't even make it 2 years before I was running this massive 100-person vampire games on the Riverwalks back in the late 90s,
Oh, wow.
and doing a lot of like these big, you know, live action games with year-long continual plot lines. And you had to become very quickly adept at writing storylines for 100 different characters with a little agency from the storyline to make them all tie. And like, I had to write a story. I had to write storylines so that people could go off and play and never come back to me.
Right.
And then I wouldn't see them for 2 months.
Right.
And then they'd be like, okay, this plot line's done. I got like all of these things because I was writing knowing that these other people are playing the arguably NPCs. And at some point, I think it was around 2016, I sat down and I started writing novels. And because once I became a novelist and I started writing the Seventh Age series, and then I'd done some ghost writing and some other storyline, it was always in literary fiction. So when I finally went back to gaming, I had done some like minor freelance writing for gaming the whole time, just little things like, oh, I'm going to submit a fiction to this story, or I'm going to submit this like little character letter to this one company. But when I really started getting back into it, I found that I was always the one doing the narrative fiction, leaving the game design and the mechanics and the fiddly rules bits sort of to people that really enjoyed crunch, which naturally matched my storytelling style. I would completely throw out rules all of the time and be
Right.
like, okay, what's going to work for table tension at the moment? And that table tension is my biggest meter, which is why I think my favorite systems are Dread and 10 Candles.
Um, so then tell me, what makes a good story for you? Like, what
For
is it that
me,
sort of, yeah, for you in particular? Because I mean, I don't know. I'm assuming that when you're putting stuff on the page, you're sort of following the old adage that what you're most interested in, you should just follow your passions for it or whatever. And when you follow that and you're yourself, you'll do your best work and all of that.
so
What's
I
your
think that's true. And I was actually kind of joking in our Discord server over at Storytellers Forge. I realized I think I might be typecast as an author, and
mm-hmm.
because I love amazing villains, right? And I also tend to write a lot of things about dead, the projects that I've worked on. I grew up
Yes.
with Wraith the Oblivion. I'm doing the Red Opera was, dark and villainous, right? Um, and then The Crow is one
Mm-hmm.
of my favorite genres of all time and favorite movies and stories. So to be able to write official canon fiction
Yeah. It's like,
in
holy
that
cow.
was like, you know, still to this day. But again, dealing with dead things. The Black
Mm.
Ballad, dealing with dead things. I'm working on Universal Soldier upcoming. Again, dealing with dead soldiers.
Wait, Universal
Um,
Soldier, as in like Dolph Lundgren, Jean-Claude Van Damme.
yes,
Universal. Oh, that is dealing with
yes.
dead things.
And so I realized I was like, wait a minute. I wrote another adventure for this other studio called Quest Labs about the toll of the ferrymen, and they're
Mm-hmm.
about like the ferrymen in the River
Mm-hmm.
Styx. And I was like, oh wait, I really write a lot about death. Even my novel
Mm.
series deals with purgatory. And but that is just a styling because I like having characters deal with sometimes with difficult things. And what makes a good story to me is a sense of magical wonder, exploration, and conspiracy. I love good conspiracy hooks in storylines. I love it when there's different factions in a world of moral gray,
Mm.
and every side can be right and viewed from that
Mm.
sense of, I see where these people are coming from,
Mm.
and it gives you a difficult choice because you want to root for both sides,
Yeah.
but you can't because their paths are inexorably going to collide with each other. And somewhere down, you got to pick up the pieces. In an RPG game, it can be a lot of fun to have those two trains colliding, and as players try to find ways to salvage something, hopefully. Um,
I
so
I I think when you said that, I was thinking in my head the best moments for me as a game master or dungeon master or storyteller or whatever you happen to be playing are those moments where I can watch my players wrestling with some moral conundrum. And you can see how two or three of them feel one way, two or three of them feel the other, and they're trying to sort of find some sort of middle ground. And I love that because like you mentioned earlier about like writing a story and then stepping back. I feel like to me, and I don't know if you agree with this or not, but to me, like game mastering is very much like an inverted pyramid, kind of like at the top of the pyramid when we start as a game master, I'm kind of like very involved and I'm trying to set things like in certain directions maybe. And then I'm like getting less and less and less involved and I eventually just back off and the players are running things kind of all by themselves. And I love that idea of them having to sort of deal with those moral conundrums like that because it's like I've done my job. I've set things up. Now they're telling the story and I'm just going to like, I poke it every once in a while to get it spin it in this direction or that direction and then they sort of take it wherever they want to take it, I
oh
guess.
yeah, I
So,
do this whole panel on how to not suck at storytelling, where like we talk
yes.
about like our worst mistakes we ever made and stuff, and we talk about like that concept where you sit there and we I call it like being an obstructionist storyteller, and it's actually not what people would inherently think of that term. They go, wait, obstructionist, you're the black people. I'm like, no, 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 you don't understand. The world has consequences for good or bad.
Right.
We spend a lot of time creating a big sandbox, and then every time you take actions, positive or worse, we just keep putting more obstacles in your way.
Mm.
good consequences, bad consequences, but things keep unfolding, and
Right.
every door you open leads to more plot line
Yes.
and more personal development of your characters with some challenges to overcome, so that they are satisfying moments, not just, oh,
Right.
hey, I can, anybody can just take their pencil and erase hit points off their sheet and put it to 100. But if you
Yeah.
didn't actually play the game to get there, it
Yeah.
doesn't mean anything.
Someone has just recommended, and I actually can kind of see this. Someone in the chat has said, you just need to write about RoboCop now. RoboCop, who is essentially, well, I don't know. I think it's
No, I would love to write. First off, I love RoboCop. I have some serious themes with RoboCop in the sequel of my novel. My first one, when like techno magic starts coming, and like they take basically this person and like jack him up with demon blood and reanimate him with like cybernetics and things, and he kind of goes through the novel like getting back to where he was. I won't tell you whether or not it's successful or not, but
don't spoil it.
let's just say that I got to have the thing that I love about RoboCop. Anybody who probably knows me is I love writing really sarcastic, scathing advertisements.
Oh, that's perfect.
And I love taking like twisted things and making like terrifying ads about like this demonic toaster. It really heats things up, like, and I'll get like all cheesy with it, and like, like the buy now, I will bake in sometimes dark comedy into all kinds of places. So if there's ever a RoboCop, I know there's a RoboCop RPG. I think there's something that's out there.
Yeah, I feel like they just released like a Terminator RPG, and I don't know if the RoboCop RPG is related to that somehow, or maybe I'm wrong.
No, the Terminator's done by Free League. I actually one of the people who did the Terminator's actually working on the Black Ballad.
Cool.
Yeah, it's Andrew E.C. Gasca. He did the Aliens Free League and things like that. I actually have to do some writing direction and shoot him back some emails tonight when we're done.
Cool. Wow, so, ladies and gentlemen, you just, that's insider information, all the latest stuff that's going on as all the writers are messaging each other back and getting things done. Well, let me say this then. Is it safe to say you're more of a GM than a player? Or are you more of a player than a GM, or are you?
Oh no, I'm cursed to be the forever SD.
Now, do you do that because you're cursed, or do you feel? I was just talking to someone a few weeks ago, and they were saying, and I kind of feel like this: their brains get a little bit bored. No offense to any of their GMs, but they get a little bored because they're so used to like spinning 10 different plates in the air at the same time. Is your mind like? Is it just gotta be like spinning all those plates? And
no, in fact, I don't get me wrong, I love storytelling, right? It's a thing. But I also love playing. I have played in some really long-term campaigns. The problem is getting me to be a player in a game. I know I'm going to get emotionally invested.
Mm-hmm.
So games that I know are only going to last for like a game session or a 2 or 3, I'm like, listen, I am already pinched for time already. I'm just not going to buy in. So, but if I knew that, like, there's one of my friends, we have a dev editor on the project named Ray Jenkins, who is a fantastic storyteller, and I've played in some very long games with Ray. If he was ever able to get it set, he's trying to, right? We're trying to get a Witcher game going right now. And, but if I could find a way to play for a solid year-long campaign, I would dive on that in a heartbeat, because I also like to be on the other side and just experience like, here's that character growth myself. Right. I also like, this is going to sound strange and heretical in the sometimes role-playing community, I love leveling up. I love getting experience and like, leveling up my character, rolling stats, unlocking new features, shopping through the spell book of like, ooh, okay, when I get to like level this part, I can get this thing. Or if I role play, I can go get training and maybe unlock these features. I love that kind of.
It's another form of growth. And I feel like it's one that I myself often don't appreciate enough. And like, I think one of my problems as a game master is that I tend to be very, it's not necessarily a problem, but it's just a question of finding people that match, like my own styles. I tend to just put so much emphasis on narrative that I'm kind of blinded to the fun of the mechanical sides of it and the way that opening up, and I think I need to learn to take more advantage of this, opening up a character's abilities as they level up adds to the flavor of the character and adds dimension to them. And I think I tend to sometimes, I don't place enough emphasis on that as a game master. It's something I've always, it's one of the things that I try to work on. So I can completely understand, like as a player, you see like those little, you can see like, oh my goodness, I can do this, I can do that. And the other thing, it builds to your character. So I completely see what you're saying.
Yeah, you get some really cool iconic ability to start just wielding shadows and like extra arms or shadow walking. All of a sudden, your character is now, you can have art styles and commissions and other things. You can just imagine, okay, what could you do with those abilities? And then unlike a video game and a role-playing game, you could actually go play with them.
Right.
So it's like I like unlocking new powers for my characters just so I could actually go play with them. But again, I also have the emotional investment that I like long-term character growth.
Right.
And if I come to a table, I'm like, I'm that player with like, here's my backstory, here's my soundtrack, here's a bunch of artwork of what I got for the character. And because I guess being a writer is kind of the same thing. I've talked with other writers, so I know I am not alone in this. I will argue in my head with my own characters consistently, even though I have the manuscript and the outline and the plot points. I'm basically role playing with myself in my brain.
Yeah.
They're all different characters. And so when like a character wants to kill themselves before their time, and I'll be like, no, you're still here all the way to this point. The character will be like, no, I'm going now. And I'm going to do this thing, and it's going to be badass. I'm going to jump out of this building and drag this person down with me and like punch them all the way down and crash into a car. I'm going to say something witty while I do it. And I'm like, oh, why are you doing this to me?
People get invested. Like it's amazing. Like in my time playing, like even I get invested, and like it's amazing the emotional reaction that you can get out of, events that are fictional, yet they're characters that you're completely tied to, and they're essentially like a dimension or a shade of.
So that's really important, because one of the reasons that we wanted to do something with the Black Ballad is what we do see is one, and I have seen this time and time again throughout my time around being around the game industry, is storytellers don't know what to do when a player of theirs might be starting to die. They're getting close to the death saving throws. It's hard to die in 5th edition already, but when it happens, it's usually by player choice or something has gone egregiously wrong. And the storyteller will have to start fudging dice, or they'll change their encounter up so that it might not happen. Because when you're barreling down a TPK, you actually don't know what to do.
Yeah.
But if you know that something like the Black Ballad exists,
right,
you could be like, no, you went into that, you went into Waterdeep and you decided to go ahead and like piss off all of the vampire nobles. They're going to kill you with assassins. And now you can go reflect upon why maybe that was a bad idea to go do that action. And it kind of puts that emphasis that your players can fail. And that's an important part of their journey so that they have something to rise from. Because without that sharp consequence, at that point, you're just a bag of infinite hit points with a cleric that just keeps casting Healing Ward all the time, and nobody ever dies. Battle doesn't really mean anything. You never lose arms, limbs, things like that. And Adventurers League can kind of get a little bit like that at times, when you're kind of playing sometimes the organized play elements. Homebrew games, they're always different. Homebrew games are always on the strength of the storyteller with the player, and they'll do all kinds of personal tales. But knowing that we can arm storytellers with here's what to do next and why this is cool takes off some of the pressure to make a better campaign and story for everybody at the table. On the flip side, let's say you are a player and you have a 10-year long investment with your character and you die. now you know that like with the Black Ballad, it's like you're not going to be as afraid or worried about like what do you do now because you have that buffering zone while you're waiting to be resurrected, right? Because it's
Mm,
pretty much gonna happen. Somebody's gonna pay 100 gold pieces and
mm,
bring you back from the dead, but now it's a chance for you to meet your god.
mm.
You know, now it's a chance for further development, and rather than just isolate that one singular player, heck it, let's take all of you. We're all
Right.
throwing you all
Why
down
not?
there at once. So now you can go through the journey together.
Mm.
Um, and then the third awesome reason that I really liked what we hit upon with the Black Ballad was it's a great adventuring hook. Imagine none of you know each other at all. You're sitting down to the table for the first time. You're starting off in the Black Ballad. Nobody died prior. Hey, you died. How? And that's your character introduction.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I like that as well. So tell me then, what do you think? Um, what is what is Rick Heinz's opinion on what makes a good campaign book? Because you had sort of touched on this before about the idea of having like this clear like story and what what aren't necessarily chapters or sessions but could be expanded and explored. What makes a great campaign book for you?
So the reason I even started writing campaign books and storylines is because I was having a real hard time finding what I wanted.
Hmm.
And that is storylines that reward player agency. Most so it's a lot of campaign books, officially published ones, they have some great beats and they have some good points to them, but there's also a lot of critique that is out there for some of them because you understand that once you know how sometimes these things are made,
Hmm.
you kind of start seeing like, you're a writer, you go to the movies, you start catching things. I'm like, I know where these go. But campaign books tend to be very narratively linear written. Players go here, they have a small encounter, they go to here, then they have another smaller encounter, then they go here, and then they maybe have a bigger encounter. But if they missed this one thing, well, the campaign kind of comes to a stop. You're off the rail line, and then the storyteller's going to have to reach into their own toolbox to maybe get players back onto this sandbox. And then when they get to the end,
Hmm.
when they go through the entire campaign, there's really no alternative endings. You beat you beat Strahd or you don't beat Strahd. And if they do have alternative endings in there, like okay, you are now part of, Ravenloft. You are now taking his spot, right? There's usually only one or two.
Hmm.
And there's not a lot of larger implications to the world or the setting
Hmm.
for the player's heroic actions. And the reason why is because all of them are written to be entirely modular. Here's your self-contained thing and it won't impact anybody else's group. The storyline exists in a vacuum. And even if you did another adventure after, like the tenuous thread is
Hmm.
is kind of there, and they're only written for usually adventures like 5 to 12 or levels 5 to 12. That's the most common product that is out there. I like seeing things that are more for homebrew GM games. Here is something that takes and plugs from your world,
Hmm.
fits in where it allows you to weave in all of your story and character depth that you may have built for a year of play or use that to even get started. And then we're going to present 4 or 5 or even the themes of how to craft your own ending. And so if a player sat there and read the campaign book, they would actually have no idea how the Black Ballad's going to
Hmm.
end
Hmm.
until they actually played it because there's multiple things that can potentially all be true. And it's up to the storyteller to kind of pick from the options
Hmm.
as the players play. So I like seeing that. I also like things with a lot of flavor.
Hmm.
Um, Mood and theme, music, immersion, and I like seeing characters and world development happen. But again, I come from White Wolf as a primary
Yeah.
background.
Yeah.
Chicago by Night and, the Giovanni, Family Chronicles or Wraith Oblivion's End of Days are some fantastic game lines, but all of White Wolf's model was based off heavy world conspiracy or global events and character tie-ins with consequences that would have impact more than just the character. Legend of the Five Rings is another great game system that I really loved when you had all the different clans and you were doing the Rorokiwari City of Lies box set, and the clan Scorpions doing their elements. And, it will actually have an impact in the Empire for the rest of your campaign,
Mm,
even
mm.
beyond that adventure set. And Dungeons and Dragons, or Wizard of the Coast specifically, I should say, because Pathfinder does an amazing job with their
I was
adventures.
going to ask about
And
this. Yeah,
uh,
please.
so, yeah, Pathfinder's got Paizo puts out some amazing campaign adventures, but Wizards of the Coast pre-published recently. They started to change. I think maybe the past 2 years they've had some fantastic releases come out that are starting to bring in more community engagement, and a lot of writers are doing and bringing sort of the D&D that they're actually playing to life. But Wizards did have they weren't really doing campaign books. They were kind of just releasing them, but their strength was on setting books.
Mm.
And, here's all the player options and the class designs and, the play test. And that was where they were doing a really good job. But I kind of found their early on fifth edition campaign books to be, good to pop open, good to see, okay, here's the main hook. I'm going to use this one bit. And I would just chuck the book out and then just go
Yeah.
run the game. Like I ran out of the abyss and I just started with, hey, you're in hell.
Mm.
You're in jail. And then after that, are we really going to go through the Underdark and, name every single demon and spend, 18 game sessions wandering around with random encounters between purple worm tunnels? It's not very compelling to me.
What is it like? You've said a lot of stuff there that I want to talk about. And ladies and gentlemen, you are getting your money's worth here. Rick Heinz, like when he answers a question, he answers the questions and he opens up all kinds of new questions. So I'm going to quickly sort of go through, I think, 2 or 3 questions that I have here. And
Sure.
maybe now the first thing was your observation there about the endings of a campaign. And like I've sort of faced this myself. I didn't learn this until I started writing things down. Like usually when I'm doing notes for my games, I'm just writing down the stuff that happens. And so when I have these notes, and I often listen to because I record the audio for my players so I can review it, and they listen to it too to refresh their memories. The next game that I build, the next session that I build is based on what's happened in the prior session.
Yep.
Now, I started running into problems here because I started thinking to myself, you know what? Why don't I start writing my adventures down and I can just write them out? What I realized was I was writing adventures that were very dependent on what happened before, because I was writing adventures for what had happened before. So I would write down, like, say, a mansion burned down at the end of one of the episodes of my game. In the next episode, the mansion, we'd start with the mansion having been burned down, and I realized I don't necessarily know if I'm going to publish this or if I'm going to distribute it even on the internet just for free. I don't know if the players would have reached the same result. So how do you, like, when you're sitting down to write out a campaign, how do you manage to keep the thread going, but at the same time allow the game masters, the dungeon master, or the players enough space to sort of move around, like you're saying? Because I feel like the deeper you get into the story, it's like the butterfly effect. Like the deeper, like when you start on page 1, all of those things could possibly happen. But then when you get to page 2 or 3 or 4 of the adventure, slowly doors start to close a little bit because the players are, I don't know if this is making sense. The players are just like,
It does, because I know you're going. I'm just trying to think of how to answer this, because
it's a weird question.
one thing that I have is I'm kind of blessed that I spent about 12 years writing storylines and plots for people in a live action game. And that taught me really quickly how to gravitate towards player agency, knowing that every player is their own storyteller when I'm not there. And my job is to show up and provide iconic plot beat moments as NPCs to enhance the game or arrange special events to happen. So kind of learning that skill, I think, was really integral. And the other thing is, it's not necessarily easy because we spend months writing out these plot lines in a game book, knowing that other people are going to run it. So we
Hmm.
have to be able to tell compelling stories that we have no control over once it hits the table. And so to find those right beats, we will constantly edit, change, strike something. I mean, there has been in the Black Ballad a mysterious chapter 2.5 that has been on the drawing board, off the drawing board, on the drawing board, and off the drawing board about 5 different times now of whether or not it was actually going to be needed. But I think the biggest secret I can give to this is take your world and know that your world is going to progress if your players aren't there. And so if you are writing one adventure to the like the if the if your adventure hinges upon the players walking into the room and picking up the 5 rings of Captain Planet
Mm.
to go do this thing, well, what happens if the players never go to that room and pick up the 5 rings? Does the world just stop existing? No, somebody else finds it.
Mm.
And so that's the thing. You can write your plots like you've been doing them, because I write sometimes when I'm running a game. I will run a game based off of what my players did last session, but I always have an overall plot thread
Hmm.
of what happens if they pass or fail almost on every plot beat with a branching tree. And I get to loop back in. So in both the Red Opera, Sirens Battle of the Bards, and in the Black Ballad, there is always one option of here's what happens if your players do nothing.
Right.
Your players can just completely never even pay attention to the adventure, and here's your ending without heroic involvement.
Can you so I'm really glad, nice segue. I was about to ask about the Red Opera Last Days of the Warlock myself. So you and Patrick Edwards created it, correct? Can you tell us a little bit about its origins, like where the idea came from, like how you got it on the page, and maybe the
Yeah.
process?
So, God, it started off. So I'm a concert, or I'm an electrician here in Chicago by day, and I used to do a lot of concert lighting, stage show, theater lighting, things like that, as my nighttime gig.
Oh.
And so I've seen a lot of concerts and music and metal and like bands of all types, which is why I like write to music and things. And I was hanging out with Diamorte in my kitchen, which at the time had like members from Cradle Filth, a few other people, whatnot. And they were actually lamenting about how difficult it is to get metal music out into the world. And knowing Drake Mephisto, like I had before, we have perhaps played some Vampire the Masquerade together, which is why we're over at our house drinking. And I was like sitting there and I was like, I had already written novels at this point. I had already been writing for Geek and Sundry, doing other things. I was kind of well into my pathway of this is what I wanted to do. I was like, well, you guys have this awesome orchestra to your track, and I know your entire story for the Red Opera, like the actual album that's happening, because I was there for it when we wrote it. We kind of played some parts of it,
Mm.
and I was like, you guys know that the Venn diagram between metal and gamers is like just a giant circle, right?
Mm.
And everybody was like, everybody, I'm just sitting there drinking mead, and everyone was just like, oh crap, that's a thing. I'm like, well, I guess I'm writing a campaign book now. And I was just supposed to write this, maybe 20,000 word band merch that like they would sell at concerts or like they could put
Oh.
up on the internet.
Wow.
It was meant
Okay.
to be just this
Yeah.
like small little
Yeah.
supplement, right? So I got a contract with Drake. I was like, hey, I'm actually a professional writer, so you're gonna have to pay me for this one. And he was like,
Yeah.
yeah, no problem, no problem. And so we signed up a contract, we did the thing, and I made it about a month into writing, and I was like, I'm at 50,000
Right.
words.
This is
I
a
have an entire
thing.
I have an entire setting. Like the
Yeah.
Shade Lands
Yeah.
is this element. And so I called up Drake and I said, Drake, I want to make a full campaign book. And Drake was like, whatever you need, man. Brother, I have you. Like you are doing some really awesome stuff. He's like, everybody who touches this ends up going crazy with it. I'm like, I got a friend. Uh and I got called up Pat Edwards, and Pat Edwards, Joseph Asfahani, and Courtney Penny were the three
Mm-hmm.
people
Mm-hmm.
that came on, and Joe,
They're
Courtney and Joe
working with
were,
you now, correct? They're
yes,
your
yes.
co-founders. Okay.
Yeah. So Joe was our one of our dev editors. Courtney was one of the people to like really like she wrote like added a whole different perspective to the lyric sheets and was one of our main editors. And then I would be in charge of like the plot, and then Pat came through as like the setting guy. And
Mm-hmm.
Pat invented like a lot of the setting, the monsters, and like that part. Because I kind of confessed, I was like, dude, I hate writing I hate writing like monster stats. I'm like, Pat, just you take care of the monster fights. I will take care of the plot beats. Because I didn't like writing monster stats because I never used them. I was just like, yeah, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like table tension. And so that's how we got started writing, and we spent about a good year and a half before we were done with the manuscript and getting everything all like polished up. And that's when we brought it to publication. David Granjo, who was the lead artist on the Red Opera, he's actually working with us now on the Black
Mm-hmm.
Ballad
Mm-hmm.
over at Storytellers Forge. We had some ups and downs through publication, but
Yeah. Yeah.
that's what happens anytime something goes
Mm-hmm.
live to that project
Mm-hmm.
size. But at the end of the day, it's actually still a really great book, and I freaking love it.
Yeah.
And for a first run of building of something that scale in size, we learned a ton.
That's kind of what I was going to get at as well. There were a couple connections here that like I was thinking about. Now, I know this is going to sound really silly. This is like my J.J. Abrams like linking all of the things on the island together, trying to figure out what's going on. So you have the Red Opera, 3 words. There's a color in there in the middle. Now you have the Black Ballad. Are these all kind of meant to be part of like a spectrum that sort of fits together, or is it just a coincidence? Or
No, it's totally not a coincidence. There is
okay,
actually going to be the Red Opera, the Black Ballad, and then there is something else for the third one, which is when that comes, it will be a thing. But
oh,
they
okay,
are meant to, even though you could play the Black Ballad without
yeah,
ever having known what the Red Opera was.
yeah,
If you did play the Red Opera and you had the Black Ballad, you're going to see a lot of fun like ties,
okay.
and then there
That's
will
what I
be
was thinking.
one there will be one after as well, and all of them will coincide with an album from Diamorte. And all of them will have full metal music, and ideally, if you could put them all in a badass box set together,
Yeah.
you basically have a, like the Giovanni family chronicles. You would have this like
Mm,
epic, massive
mm,
campaign storyline that would span over 3 things, and probably with some novels that are going along with it too.
yeah. Okay. I was sort of thinking that in the back of my head, and I wasn't sure what the links exactly would be, but I figured there was something like that going on, and I was actually. Yes, I was definitely kind of thinking that. Now, they're linked to, and we've kind of, or you've mentioned this a few times, and I do this as well. I imagine that music and soundtracks, are they a large part of your games?
Uh,
Like, are they running in the
yep.
background? Are you like mixing them, or are you like DJing them as like you're running your games for your sessions? Or
I have many Spotify playlists.
okay,
Yes. I have playlists for every character, both for writing mode, sometimes for when I'm just, listening, even when I'm just writing plot lines or even building character stats, I'll have whole YouTube soundtracks for people. When I'm running games, I always have music. In
mm,
fact, one of the biggest reasons that I never got big into actual play or like streaming and running games online is it doesn't work for my style of storytelling. I'm an in-person storyteller.
mm,
I like, the incense candle, the music, the food,
mm,
like the dim lighting. Like
mm,
we have a thing when we play in person,
mm.
and that's where I shine more.
Is actually the deeper I get into this interview with you, the more I feel like you were just sort of made for to do your work with the Crow, because I was thinking a lot about how you've mentioned music here. You've mentioned the dark themes, the death elements of the story. Um, how was it that you came to work? You did some work for I guess it was story and adventure credit. I think on is that correct or you're
So how did I come to do the
yeah
Crow? Yeah,
yeah
just in general. Actually, this is one of those things. If you're a writer or you're looking to get into freelance game industry or anything like that, here's a tip. And you listen to this interview. One, have something published. Just one thing officially published first, even if it's on DM's Guild. Totally okay. Just have something published. And two, when you see that Facebook ad scroll past about a product that is targeted to you, and I see a Crow RPG ad on my Facebook wall while I'm in bed sleeping, and I was like, wait, what? They're making the Crow RPG? And I click on that and I go check, and I see that they have it. They just launched it, and they actually said Evil Genius Studios had in their post that, hey, we got all the cinematic adventures. We've just completed our crowdfunding. We're going to go hire writers to go make these adventures. And I had no idea who the studio was. I had
right.
no idea that they had, even hit with Modern D20 on a relaunched thing.
Hmm.
So I quickly went to their website. I found their submission form link. I dropped an email and I said, you guys are doing The Crow. Please let me in on this project. I have read all the novels. I have signed my books next to James O'Barr. I have actually read the supplemental books. I've seen all the movies. I used to dress as the Crow when I
Mm,
was in high school.
mm.
And
Didn't we
so I
all?
would right. And so I was like, no, this needs to be a thing. And they came back with, well, we don't know who you are. And then I go, aha, here's the things that I do.
Hmm.
And I submitted all of my stuff, and they actually were like, oh, sure. How
Yeah.
would you like to actually do this? And they're like, don't get nervous. We're actually going to have to turn your story into the studio and to, all the powers that be, because this is officially licensed fiction. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. That's the point. I want the
Right.
blessing
Right.
from the actual
Right.
creators that my
It might
story, the
become
campaign,
canon.
is canon. And so I took a shot at it. It was very different style. I got to bring kind of my storytelling style to the Crow and have my prologues, all the things that I've mentioned
Yeah.
earlier this far in this interview.
Yeah.
They're all in there in that campaign. And and yes, I'm not the one who did the mechanics and the classes and things like that. That is Chris Ramsley over at Evil Genius, right? He's the systems designer. And what was really cool is when I was talking with Chris, I was like, oh, you got to read this thing, and I'm like
Mm.
showing him other elements of the Crow. So again, it came up that my strength is narrative writing
Yeah.
and adventure writing. So I have a interesting thing. Every time I publish a book, I get a new tattoo,
Oh,
and I'm
cool.
starting to get more covered. Um, in about a week or two, I'm supposed to actually have my first shipment of Crow RPGs that I can start
Nice.
autographing and giving to
That's
people.
awesome.
And I'm going to end up getting I'm actually getting a tattoo for the Crow, because my story, when it was read by the studio and James O'Barr, because I stitched all of the comic novels, or the comics and the novels, together to create something that pays tribute to the movie that
Mm.
we all love, while also paying tribute to the comics and some other pieces of actual really good fiction of personal tragedy and horror that have come out under that umbrella. um they were like, how did you do
Yeah.
this? And I'm like, this is the one thing that RPG games can do that other mediums can't do. We can make lots of things true at once.
Mm. It's really amazing that it's The Crow is like a huge part of my memory of like high school and early college. So I remember I probably very similar to you. I did massive amounts of painting and drawing and writing when I was like in my younger days. And I had done this amazing I mean, for me at the time, looking back on it in retrospect, this airbrush painting of Brandon Lee, like on the back of like a black leather jacket, which was very fashionable at the time, back in the late 80s, early
I still have
90s.
my trench coats right in there.
Yes,
So
me too. Mine are hanging. They're in storage at my sister's place. But so I was going to school at School of Visual Arts for film and television, and I would walk around New York City, and people would sometimes point at me and go, "Oh, it's the guy, it's the Crow guy." And like what was weird is that they would actually see the jacket, and then they would sort of like see me out of the corner of their eye, and then they'd see me later on like in the neighborhood, and I got to be known as like the Crow guy. But I just think it's amazing that you went on to contribute to that universe. And it sometimes shocks me though. What's interesting to me is that it sort of like took off like a rocket, and it always has kind of lingered. But I feel like, and you might have more information, but I feel a little bit like James O'Barr. I haven't seen, like, he's sort of popped up once or twice in the last few decades, but I don't know if he's kind of out of it now, or if he sold it off to, like, I guess Miramax or whoever owns it now, and I don't know if he's a part of it anymore, or
there's still a part that he is.
okay.
There's different parts of the medium, and the upcoming Crow movie being done by Pressman Films with like the Skarsgård and whatnot. I actually had a chance to meet with their producers, and like most fans,
Edward R. Pressman. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I had been through the cycle of like most Crow fans of, hey, this was great, to, oh my God, what happened? When it comes to the movies and other parts. And I can actually say I'm actually really freaking excited for what they are doing for what's coming out.
Yeah.
Like the amount of comic lore that is infused. Like, I got to actually reference Skull Cowboy.
I was gonna say
very
obscure,
like,
except for
like,
the
right.
Yeah.
If
the diehards.
if you've only seen the movie, that means nothing to you.
Yeah.
It's
such a shame that like they filmed those Skull Cowboy shots, and it was the actor was the gentleman from The Hills Have Eyes, the really tall fellow, and he was also in like Weird Science or whatever. They dressed him up as the Skull Cowboy, and they shot like him like meeting Brandon Lee and all of that, but then they ended up cutting it out, and like for a lot of people those were like some of the best like scenes from the original comic, like when I think it was, I forget who it was, Caliber I think published that, but at any rate.
Oh yeah, no, I don't remember who actually was the original publisher, but I do know that like I got to actually like research the United Cement Factory, that like it was all shot at to AKA Make My Club Trash, 20 years later. Wow. And the campaign in The Crow for the everyday heroes system. I freaking love it. The artwork is awesome. Like the things that you could play. People ask, well, how could you play that with a group or party? Crow is a solo tale, of which I say, aha. But there have been multiple crows multiple times through multiple parts of things, and they're not always crows. There's multiple spirits that take people back and forth.
Oh, that's
to the lands
cool.
of the dead.
Yeah.
And so what if a series of events went down where somebody wanted to get revenge on those very spirits? So you are all from different cities in the world with tragic events, and something pulls you together. So writing the adventure hook for that was a blast.
That is
and cool. But so you can play, people that were impacted by, you could play like the people who are survivors, you could play people who are coming back from revenge, and you will get your revenge. But at the end of the day, The Crow is a tale of love and tragedy, and those themes run true even in the RPG.
So real quick, because I want to get back to your work, best track off the Crow soundtrack, do you have a favorite, or
I definitely have two, right? I mean, I'm all about Nine Inch Nails track number three, Dead Souls. Like that is there. My son is named Trent for a reason.
oh wow, okay, cool.
So he's quite well aware of that. But I'm also partial to My Life with a Thrill Kill Cult.
Hmm. That was a
Track
oh,
track number eight,
yeah,
that hits the flashlights, the machine guns, and I've
yeah,
seen My Life with the Thrill Kill called in concert 18 freaking times now.
that's awesome.
So but then again, the fact that I can rattle off the track numbers on the soundtrack and or even the score probably says yes, I am the person who should have been writing on
The
the Crow
score by
RPG.
Elliot Goldenthal, I
Yep.
believe it was.
Uh,
Yeah, like
that
those were
that that
great
that
albums.
guitar solo,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
God.
Yeah,
Anyway,
it's
yes.
it's a
Um,
anthem of a generation,
yep.
in a certain very small bit of time there, like certain people. So now let's get back to Rick Heinz. So I want to know. So I know that. So of course you've written at least two novels that I'm aware of. So what and the role playing campaigns. How, like, when an idea hits you, how do you know whether it's going to be a novel or a campaign? What was it that said, oh, okay, Seventh Age, I'm going to write a series of novels? And then I know that, did you do some mini RPG
Yeah,
stuff
I wrote
attached to that?
yeah, well, and we're going to be doing actually with Storytellers Forge a whole 7 nights of
Okay.
horror with the Seventh Age. And to be honest, there is no separation.
Mm.
I'm going to probably write novels for either the Red Opera or the Black Ballad,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to make the Seventh Age into an RPG game.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other pieces that I was working on with a game company called XYZ Game Labs, it's this time punk thing that is a little bit future release, but we're going to end up doing novels and games and tie-ins because I see all stories as integrated.
Mm.
They just showcase different things. If I want to tell a story that is really not about player involvement, it's a novel, right? Here's just this cool wicked tale to read for enjoyment and like have your element.
Mm.
But if I want to put a sandbox story, well, then it makes great for an RPG.
Mm.
I have some other ideas for stories that I would probably want to write as just sheer novels, but that kind of is like more in that cyberpunk vein
Mm.
that I like to
Mm.
also go in. Um, but even then, cyberpunk makes a great RPG. So
It does.
you can. I think I never really had writer's block because I get to write the stuff that I just want to write. I'm not necessarily chasing. I did ghostwriting for a bit, and that was a little bit difficult. I was still able to do it, but I realized, what's the point? And also, I would rather just write the things that I really find cool.
Mm.
So I'm
Mm.
going to do that part instead.
So can you tell us a little bit about the Seventh Age? So your description that I found on your website was that it's post-apocalyptic, sarcastic, urban fantasy. Tell us what that's about. I like the sarcasm part of it, by the way.
Well, here's the official pitch, right? This
Oh,
is what I
oh,
do at
okay, great.
conventions. All right. So the idea is that the Illuminati, the Masons, and a bunch of secret societies have had magic forever. And what happens in Chicago when some anarchists level the playing field and give that shit to the rest of the world? You can control people's minds, make yourself immortal. All you have to do is summon a demon, kill it, and eat its heart, which is really easy and bound to go over well when everybody in the world tries it. Nothing could ever possibly
Not
go
at
wrong.
all.
So, thus, it's sarcastic urban fantasy about the end of the world as we
Mm.
bring myth and magic crashing back on top of us, for better or worse.
Nice. I like it. Where did this idea come from? Was this something that had just been brewing in your head, or did it just come out of nowhere?
Uh, so yeah, well, it didn't really come out of nowhere. Kind of like eked in
Mm.
over many stories and things like that. But I think at some point I just kind of imagined I was working in Chicago, and I was in one of those neighborhoods where I was down in the deep tunnels and I was like coming up and working, and it was gritty and slightly dangerous, like shadows cast things along at night. And I'm like, man, can you just imagine if like a demon or an angel or a creature of myth came back into this world and crawled out of a shadow and was like, I am, this
Mm,
person, I am all powerful.
mm,
And all of a sudden, like, man, humans got guns now.
mm.
That person is not going to be sticking around. And then what do you do with that like blood? And what happens when magic gets handed to everybody? But one of the things that did happen is I was demolishing the Chicago Board of Trade, and I was taking
Legally,
off.
of course.
Yeah,
Okay.
legally. I was part of the renovation of
Yeah.
the interior crew, and we were taking off all these panels and whatnot. And behind the walls, baked into the concrete, there was all these arcane and occult symbols all throughout the Chicago Board of Trade. And my hippie foreman, he's like, dude, this is like pretty messed up. And I'm like, I'm sitting there as like a theology person,
Right.
like, oh my God, this is great. And he was like, this is like a weird cult thing. I'm like, no, it's like a church to money. But they had all of these symbols. So I started taking photos and researching them. And I found out that the one behind the vice president's office that was the most haunting to me was this crazy symbol with a plaque that person had put there, that said, a man's only worth is how much wealth you could generate, which is creepy because that's a pretty terrifying and horrible statement.
Yeah, on
And the
many
symbol,
levels. Yeah.
especially considering the Board of Trade and its
Yeah.
central power and finance. But the symbol was the official Alchemy Guild symbol of 1863, which was about turning your soul into gold, aka to be pure of heart. And I was like, you bastards, you're twisting this magic around for your own ends.
Mm.
And that, I think, right there was the official birth of the Seventh Age series.
That is so weird. I find like urban architecture to be really creepy and interesting and like just dripping with like historical like weirdness. Like I remember when I
Oh,
first moved to New York City, I would spend most of my time like I would because I was living in dorms that were old like hotels that were
mhm.
converted, and but they were these immense hotels like 60 stories tall, and I would find like an unlocked door, and with like a couple friends we'd go in and like take flashlights, and there were just this bizarre machinery and it was all shut down. Like it's just so weird though. It's so creepy that you would find that sort of thing behind the
Oh,
walls.
yeah, it's so. But I say I love. People ask me would I quit my day job, and I'm like, not unless Netflix makes a series,
Hmm.
because I see all kinds of really cool things. Mm, When you're in construction, you have the benefit of seeing a side of the world that most people never see.
Yeah.
Like the tunnels underneath O'Hare Airport are some of the most terrifying places
Oh.
on this planet when you're about 5 miles down with zero cell phone reception, a single light, and steam pipes the size of trucks running through with just that soft, cold drip of kind of condensed water on like concrete floors that could survive a blast.
Yeah.
And you're down there in the darkness
Yes.
alone.
Yes.
And it's like, no, this is a thing. I'm writing about this.
Right. I swear, like, I remember once I did, so I volunteered as to help at I won't say where, but it was a hospital in Los Angeles. And so I was on the night shift, and every so often I'd get sent downstairs into the basements, and they wanted me to, like, take something somewhere over here, go do this over there, pick something up at the other place. And I would go down like at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'd just descend the stairs. And there were tunnels that would go between different buildings, and they were made like decades,
Mhm.
before. And I'd be walking through them, and there'd be like a light that's just like snapping off and on. And like I felt like I was in Jacob's Ladder a few times, and I had to like bolt,
Oh,
like I just like run through because there'd be like these
yeah.
stuff like painted over
Yeah,
a thousand
you
times.
don't
And
want the people with their heads shaking and moving with the
no,
faceless
that's
thing.
that's right.
By the way, Jacob's Ladder was also just a great
That
deep
was a
cut from,
great.
again, that same generation of just, we have seen some things. Movies have tormented us.
Yes, yes. I'm starting to see some of the commonalities here and some of the themes coming out. So tell us then, it all culminated in the Storyteller's Forge, at least to a certain degree. So you started that with Courtney Penny and Patrick Edwards, and I apologize, there was another person in there. I believe you
Oh
mentioned
no,
him.
no, Joe is off in
Ah.
English land writing novels about animal and
Oh.
man,
Oh. Okay.
and like he's doing some crazy stuff
How
there. Joe,
how did Storytellers Forge come about?
well,
Had you always been
we wanted,
planning? Oh.
uh, so not really. We, I think in our time being in the industry, we've all run into successes and things that had hit on the other side.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what we realized was that, you know, we have a lot of talent, we have a lot of friends, we want to be creative focused. And, I'm a project manager and electrical trades. Pat had his element that he does. Um, and there's a lot of people that when the idea of going to form an LLC, going to grab legals, contracts, other parts, things like that, that when you get to the business aspect of
Mm,
forming a studio, creatives sometimes
right.
they would go, "Oh, that's a lot." Right. And we had the means and the ability to like start this up, also out of determination. We were not going to let past failures take us out of the industry or prevent us from going forward. And so we definitely wanted to be, nope, we're doing this, right?
Mm,
We're taking it in house and we're doing things differently. We're letting all of our contributors who work on our projects actually be able to like go take their books and buy them at wholesale rates, like actually be able to go off and like do conventions, go do their signings. Creators also own the rights if they're the prime creator of their project, so that we could write storylines and campaigns for other game studios would be pretty cool.
mm,
And even also lower the barrier of entry for publishing because we partnered with Four Horsemen
yes.
and they.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I believe that for some reason your audio is just dropped. Let's see if we can make sure that we get this here. I don't know what could have caused that. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me just make sure I'm not actually hearing you on my end. Let's just double check. Rick, can you please try to say something? Are you hearing me okay? Oh, maybe you're not. So we're having a little bit of a technical snafu right now. But Rick, can you hear me? Oh, I can hear
I
you
can hear
now.
you. We talked long enough that my headset died.
Oh, no problem. Don't worry.
Oh,
So Rick, thank you. And thank you to your headset, because for a moment there I was terrified that between all the moving, between everything going on, that I had screwed up the big interview. And if it's just a headset, I love it. I welcome this error. Thank you, Rick, and thank you, headset, for having that error. I feel so much
we
better.
ran out of battery.
And
But yeah,
and
so
oh, so Neoseth, everything is okay. Neoseth is he's like $20 battery died. Okay, well, we'll see. But anyway,
so
please
where did
continue.
I cut out? Was I talking about Four Horsemen
You
yet?
were just about to say yes, just about to talk about your partnership with Four Horsemen.
So we partnered with Four Horsemen. They're this women-owned enterprise that's out of Florida, and they're actually much, much larger than otherwise known because they do a lot of textbook publishing. They have, English
Mm.
PhD candidates. Like there's a whole branch that they have. And we have the ability, if we go to crowdfunding with something like the Black Ballad,
Mm.
um, we can allow other novelists or other authors or people that want to be authors, as long as they got the writing chops and they're willing to do it, to submit to us and be like, oh, this would make a really cool story in the setting of like the Black Ballad or in these other things, to actually get people a path to fully publishing, like novels in Barnes and Noble with
Yeah.
audiobooks and all these things, because there is obviously a, hey, it's tied to this one thing, but also, traditional lit publishing in New
Right.
York, it's a very high barrier of entry, for not necessarily any solid reason. It's more out of luck and just volume of
Mhm.
getting through at the right time, not because you're a bad writer. Actually, there's a lot of great writers. It's
Mm.
just bandwidth. And so we get to do some stuff like that that is pretty different, and we get to put forth storytelling as our like studio brand that we want to do. And I don't know. I think all of the cards just kind of fell into place at the right time. We managed, I've gotten friends like James Mazingo, who's our art director. He'd been looking out for me. He'd been in the game industry longer than I have. And so there were times when I was working for various publishers or various elements that he would be like, Rick, watch out for this. And he'd like pull me
Right.
back, and
Right.
stuff like that. And
Has
then working at Geek and Sundry
mm,
allowed me to meet so many other game studios. So I got to kind of ask a lot of them, hey, what do you do that works? What would you go back and not do? And then I would also start seeing like the plight of the freelance writer
yeah.
or freelance artist in the industry and realized, oh, okay, this is how it's broken because I have been there.
Yeah.
And, I do want to have some impact. I understand that, hey, you're a business and you only have X to go with, but there's got to be a way to make it so that when you work on a project, when you're done with that project, that shouldn't be the end of it for you, right? You should be able to use your artwork or have some capacity like, I did this thing, and not just, oh, I did this art piece for this one thing and I got my, X $100 and then just walked away and I never really thought about it again.
Mm, mm. You know, um, forgive me for asking here, and I won't get into the details because anybody that wants to get into the details can go research it on the internet. But I was just wondering, I know you had some trouble before with with the Red Opera, and I was just wondering, are you still like is the stuff that you created, is that something that you're going to kind of continue to be able to say use like in the same ways that you were kind of mentioning before, or is that kind of locked up with the other company right now and it's kind of like out of your hands, if that makes any
There's,
sense?
that gets a little, it's a little tricky in
Yes.
where those lines are. And in fact, there's a reason I say the Red Opera Last Days of the Warlock is that's a very specific title for one part, but we always owned the Red Opera.
Okay.
Uh, and
Okay.
so anything with the Red Opera, the Shadelands, Diamorte, the music, the
Right.
metal, that stuff, yeah, it's fair game for me to work with.
Oh, great.
But the Red Opera, Last Stage of the Rock. Hey, it's a great campaign book. There's some amazing authors, a lot of great collaborators on it.
Yeah.
The art,
Yeah.
freaking beautiful. Um, you know, go for it. Whether or not in the future we're able to, re-release that under Storytellers Forge, that would be pretty awesome.
Yeah,
But
because I was just thinking just about like what you were saying, like that, like a set featuring the three projects or whatever, like all kind of together. And I thought that would be so
would
cool. I didn't know if it's like a
would be cool. But yeah, it would be cool. But if it doesn't come to pass or happen,
yeah.
hey, we have the Black Ballad could be the first book, and we got other ones we
Yeah,
can write.
exactly, exactly. Well, let me ask you this, like, and I apologize again. Earlier on, I may have misspoken, and I may have said Kickstarter by mistake. But you're using Backer Kit with this one. Can you tell, like, for a layman such as myself, what would be the advantage of, or what was the appeal of going with Backer Kit as opposed to say Kickstarter? Do they offer different types of things, or are they?
So really comes down uh, to the customer or somebody who's going to back things. It's probably irrelevant, right? To anybody going to
Right.
back a thing, it's going to be the same. You go, you pledge,
Mm.
or you don't. It was Backer Kit was for the past 15 years the one thing that made Kickstarter actually kind of functional. They did the lead generation ahead of time. They did the pledge services on the back end. They, coordinated everything so that, you could actually fulfill your backer rewards. If I was a major company that had my own in-house fulfillment, distribution, shipping and things like that, they don't need to go to crowdfunding.
Mm.
Paizo just releases a book,
Mm.
and it's just like, hey, we're here. Um, but so for me, it was I could start a company that would instantly separate ourselves sort of in the marketplace by going to BackerKit because it's our first project. So I don't have, a 10-year long history on Kickstarter. Second, they hit all three points that we would need, whether it be lead generation, crowdfunding in the middle, and then post services on the end until we get our print run done and we get everything delivered. So by stitching all three together, everything's in one place, and they have better community and creator focused policies. So the idea of unfulfilling a product on BackerKit is not something that BackerKit stands for to the same degree that sort of Kickstarter, which has become so large that a lot of those like empty, they hide behind disclaimers and stuff like that. So, but there's advantages to both. Kickstarter allows you to have a far bigger reach, and because of that, campaigns will get vastly more visibility on Kickstarter. And there's more plugins available for Kickstarter. If perhaps we had like a bigger engine to what we were doing, Kickstarter might have suited us better. And then there was GameFound that we were looking at, which is very focused around, with a bunch of different pricing models and how they want to raise fundraising from GameFound. There's a lot of different crowdsourcing or crowdfunding options out there, but we always need them as small indie presses or even major mid-sized indie presses. You totally need to be having them because, well, we like to pay writers and artists.
Yeah. I think that's a delightful policy. Delightful. Can you tell me, so you'd hinted at this before, I'm sure you learned a lot from having worked on Red Opera. And now you're going to sort of turn all of that knowledge like into the Black Ballad. Can you tell us a few things maybe that like you feel like you're doing differently with the book or differently with the layouts or design or the story itself, or is there something that you feel was really impacted by your experiences creating the Red Opera?
Not really in the like would we do something different with how we were like we learned maybe don't have side quests as stretch goals, right? Just have our quests in the book there, just on a, know what we're doing for your outline there. When we did the Red Opera, we had stretch goals that were side quests, and they were awesome. Like I loved working with Gehenna Gaming or like Michael OJ to write like a Stranger in Tatters plot line and stuff like that. And that was fun. We'll still do side quests with those people. We're just going to make them its own thing now. But because we found out post Kickstarter to then go back to the campaign and add in and restitch a side quest was a lot harder than would have liked. So I think that's probably the one biggest change that we learned on the front end. On the back end, I've worked with a lot more people since, that time. I've learned, sort of, okay, here's the people who are great white paper writers that can just throw ideas there. Here's
when you say white paper writers, what does that mean? Is that a writing term, an industry term?
Yeah. So it means that I give you a assignment that says, hey, I need you to do this one thing, but there's no template, no direction.
Oh, just blank paper, white paper.
Scratch.
Got it.
And there are people who are very good on you give me a template.
Yeah.
And this format, and I will make this thing go. And then there are people who are like, I'm going to generate this, and I need an editor to help me pour it into the template later. But that's like behind the scenes. Like it's actually kind of fascinating industry stuff. Like, learning
I
how
think
to register.
so. Yeah.
Like I want to do a whole series on TikToks where I show authors how to register their copyrights for their own projects. Because I think that is a thing that should be out there more.
Yeah, totally valid.
Is not that scary.
Yeah.
For $35, you could actually have your copyrights registered. It should be done.
It's
So
it's funny, like we got classes like that when I was in film school. We had a law class, a film law class, and it covered everything. Well, at that time, because when I went to school, things were very different than they are kind of now, like technology wise and all of that. But it covered everything like soup to nuts or whatever the term is, like how to like register this, how to register that, what to do with your screenplays, what to do with your films. Like I agree though. I think like, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, emailing your manuscript to yourself does not count. That's in there.
Yes, that's what they used to make fun of. As they say, you know, if you want to do like the cheap one, yeah, I guess you can just mail it to yourself but otherwise you can go down and get it registered at the WGA or copyright it, like as you really should. So can you tell me like what all of these themes? As I'm looking at Rick Heinz, all of these themes, you have these dark operatic musical epic like story like dramatic story arcs. What is it about all this stuff you think that appeals to you? What is it? What keeps you coming back for more? Why do you like circle around this like constantly? What is it about these themes that attract you?
I grew up listening to a lot of Rammstein, and I read Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. Like, I mean,
Enough said.
like, I love epic fantasy as a genre, and that metal always had very operatic, huge themes to it. I'm a massive fan of like vampires and like Byzantine conspiracies and all of those plot lines. And like I said, I love villainry in like good in fiction. Like that is awesome to me. So I keep coming back because and especially when you get to the epic things, my primary genre that I would read when I was a kid was epic fantasy. So I think that that's just kind of baked into, I was drawn to it. And I mean, Wheel of Time, each book is 800 pages.
Yeah.
There's 14 of them, all spanning different characters. And then there's so many great fantasy authors and fantasy books out there. Just being lost in books has, I think, made me more interested in long-term storylines rather than short-term, which is why I love streaming nowadays, because Cyberpunk Edge Runners tells an amazing story over 10 episodes, but it's sequential and there. But if they tried to make that a 2-hour movie, it would feel how. So I really love the change in like media that's happened, where now we're allowed to go back to longer tail stories, and the internet is for the quick hits.
Yeah, and I feel like the stories are like in a role-playing game, the stories are really allowed to breathe at a pace that's personal to the people involved. And I find that that's like a really attractive like storytelling form. And it's 4 or 5 people sitting around a table who are sort of telling stories and doing things that they, these epic, fantastic, magical, frightening, and like romantic, wonderful, like things that are all being sort of wrapped and entwined together at a pace where everyone sort of enjoys and gets something out of it. And
different paces for different mediums.
Yes.
You can do hit storytelling in 5-minute D&D. Let's go. And tell quick tales on impromptu one-on-one sessions, or you can just have those online servers that are perpetually 24/7 and play.
What do you hope that the person picking up your work gets out of it? So when they pick up the Black Ballad and they're playing it, and like, what do you hope that those players, and I count the game master kind of as a player there too, what do you hope everybody gets out of it sitting around the table?
Okay, so the generic answer is I hope everybody has a really good time sitting around the table, and that's not the answer I'm going to give, because what I secretly hope is that I secretly hope that players are going to realize a very deep moral question that we proposed about the consequences of death in a fantasy setting, and perhaps why the world never even evolves. And Forgotten Realms has been like a place that stayed the same for 10,000 years because nobody ever dies. And so at some point, what would be awesome to me is one player or one storyteller who reads that book, or they start playing their characters, gets what one of our characters is up to and have a wicked grin to themselves. And then will set themselves out to change the world and their campaign universe to come.
Another epic conclusion then. Well, let me ask you one final thing. What are the plans? You're obviously you funded. And I'm sure the immediate plans are to, like, you know, there's going to be an end of the funding campaign push. So I'll bet it's going to go much, much higher even than now. But what are like your plans for the future, Storytellers Forge, and your third installment and all of this? Is there something you've got cooking?
Yep, absolutely. So we, primary stuff for us is finish the Black Ballad and get it into the hands of people. The next 9 days on crowdfunding, we have some awesome community engagement stuff where people can actually like get a chance to submit a magical item that we'll actually put in the book. We are going to do as much as we can to hit our last stretch goal before our crowdfunding ends, because this print run we're doing for the Black Ballad will only exist from this print run. It'll be future, like wider available with a different print model, but the special edition only is available now. And so like we want to get as high as we can for that and get as many people to have the special edition. But after that, we're going to go forward and develop 3 games in the background, a little bit slower while we finish the Black Ballad, so that they're a little more done when we catch up. We got like a whole plan.
Yeah.
But we're going to do Modern Gods, written by Michael Oldages, aka Magic Mike. He's actually a magician out in your neck of the woods. And Modern Gods is a book where you play the modern incarnations of ancient gods in urban fantasy. It's like American Gods, the RPG is the easiest way to say it. And that's using the Powered by the Apocalypse system.
Oh, cool.
Because we don't need to necessarily always have 5th edition. Then we're going to do a Dark Carnival with a very prominent Eldritch Warlock that happens to be out there. And that one's written by him. And then I have a 7th Age RPG that is meant to be very short. It is just 7 one-shot games of political horror on what happens when Washington, D.C. gets access to demonic magic.
Cool. Oh my gosh.
And you are secret services or senators or people that have to deal with the potential fallout of magic handing in the really wrong hands. And each session, everybody at that session will die. So I'm going to kill players 7 times in 7 short stories.
Why not?
Right. So, and that's meant to be like just like a for fun, smaller, release, but also to showcase that we can tell stories in different formats. We don't always have to have, there will always be, I think once a year is when we'll have like a big like Black Ballad, and then we'll have some other ones that are, just like a different element.
Right. I love it. It sounds great. I look forward to seeing all of the stuff that Storytellers Forge is putting out there. So Rick Heinz, thank you very much. You've been very generous with your time. For those of you watching along at home, I say this every time. I only bring people on that I think have something really cool for you to check out. They've got something great to say. It was great having Rick on the program. And if you want to see his stuff and the stuff that his team and co-founders are doing, check out the links in the description. I think I got pretty much everything covered, maybe not everything, but I got as much as I could covered down there. And check out the Black Ballad. It is an awesome looking campaign book. I'm even more excited having heard from the man himself, who's created it. So please do check those links out. And if you liked the interview tonight, I am a little channel that could. I love getting people on the program. If you enjoyed this, then please do think about liking and subscribing. And best of all, if you could just share this, that would be fantastic. Share it with someone that you think would be really interested in it, someone who likes to write, someone who likes to do campaigns themselves, game masters who are looking for material to support and help them through their adventures as a game master. But otherwise, folks, thank you all very much. Neoseth, yeah, thank you very much, Neoseth. I thought that was pretty darn interesting, and my episodes are only as good as my guests. So finally, one last time for you, Rick. Thank you so much. Ladies and It was a pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be back in a couple weeks, but if you're interested, this Friday night, I'm running episode 4 of Sword in the Darkness. Hopefully we will not have audio issues. That's not a reference to you, Rick. That's a reference to our last episode of the show. I think we've got them figured out this time. But ladies and gentlemen, you have yourselves a great game, and everybody out there, stay safe. I'll see you in the future.